Chapter 1. The Disaster at Abbots Ripton, Improved Version. 21st January 1876, Huntingdonshire, England. This photograph, taken upon the morning of January the 22nd, 1876, at the site of what the newspapers would shortly dub the Abbots Ripton catastrophe, reveals something that even the most experienced railway investigators could scarce comprehend. Among the twisted iron and shattered timber, in the wreckage of what had formerly been the Special Scotch Express from Edinburgh to London, a small figure may be observed standing perfectly erect, untouched by blood or injury, whilst all about him lay the broken bodies of 73 souls. The boy's name was Alexander Weiss, 11 years of age, son of German Jewish immigrants who had established themselves in London's East End. By every law of nature and medicine, he ought not to have drawn breath. He ought not to have possessed the strength to stand. And yet, when Dr. Edmund Cartwright of St. Bartholomew's Hospital first approached the child in those early morning hours, wrapped about in a railway guard's greatcoat against the bitter January cold, he observed something far more disquieting than the mere fact of survival. The boy's eyes were wrong, but to comprehend what befell Alexander Weiss in those critical 14 minutes betwixt death and resurrection, we must first understand the horror of the night itself. The evening of January the 21st, 1876, commenced with a blizzard. Snow had been descending across the eastern counties of England since early afternoon, but by 6 o'clock in the evening, when the Special Scotch Express departed Peterborough Station, the storm had transformed into a white fury that rendered visibility all but impossible. The train's driver, Henry Smith, a veteran of 23 years upon the Great Northern Railway line, later gave testimony to investigators that he had never witnessed weather quite of that character. It was as if the very heavens had declared war upon the earth, he deposed at the subsequent inquiry. The snow came not in flakes but in walls of white that seemed to swallow the world whole. The Special Scotch Express, known colloquially amongst railwaymen as the Flying Scotsman, carried 47 passengers that frigid evening. Among their number were members of Parliament returning from business in Edinburgh, merchants travelling south with the week's accounts, and 3 families accompanied by children. The Weiss family occupied seats in the third carriage. Heinrich Weiss, a clockmaker of considerable skill, who had lately secured a commission to repair the chronometers at the Royal Observatory. His wife, Rachel, a seamstress known throughout Whitechapel for the delicacy of her needlework, and their only child, Alexander. Alexander had been engaged with his book for the greater part of the journey, his mother would subsequently recall, a volume concerning Greek mythology borrowed from the Whitechapel Free Library. He had exhibited particular fascination, she testified, with the tale of Kronos, the very personification of time itself. At 24 past 6 o'clock, the express departed Peterborough 6 minutes behind schedule. The train did not reduce its velocity on account of the weather. This was the accepted practice in 1876. The semaphore signal system was held to be infallible, and if the signals displayed clear, the driver received instruction to maintain full speed regardless of conditions. What Henry Smith could not have divined, what none amongst them could have divined, was that the very system designed to afford them protection had been corrupted by the storm itself. At Abbots Ripton Station, 3 miles southward of their position, signalman Thomas Marnell had been upon duty scarce an hour. He had relieved the day shift at 6 o'clock precisely, entering the small signal box that governed the junction where the main line intersected with several sidings. A coal train, delayed by the inclement weather and running considerably behind its appointed time, occupied the same track ahead of the express. Marnell drew back the levers that ought to have set his signals to danger, ought to have afforded protection to the coal train by alerting the express to reduce speed, to halt entirely. The mechanical arms of the semaphore signals moved into their appointed positions, or so Marnell believed, observing from his frost-covered window whilst the snow continued its relentless assault upon the glass. But he did not comprehend, could not have comprehended, that the accumulated weight of ice and snow gathering upon the signal arms was preventing them from falling fully into the danger position. The spectacle plates that ought to have moved red lenses before the signal lamps remained frozen fast in their housings, leaving white lights visible. White lights that signified all clear. The signals, in the precise language of the official inquiry report, were not merely useless for warning by red lights, the engine driver of the Scotch Express train, but moreover a means by the exhibition of white lights of luring him forward at full velocity to the collision. At 4:40 past 6 o'clock, traveling at approximately 45 miles per hour through the blinding snow, the special Scotch Express rounded the final curve, approaching Abbots Ripton. Driver Henry Smith had observed naught save white lights the entire distance from Peterborough. He received no warning whatsoever. The coal train, yet engaged in shunting into the siding at Abbots Ripton, materialized from the white darkness like some phantom made suddenly corporeal. Smith seized upon the brake lever with the whole of his strength, but at such velocity, with so diminutive a distance, there existed no possibility of averting catastrophe. The express engine struck the coal wagons with a sound that witnesses dwelling 3 miles distant subsequently described as resembling thunder, or artillery discharge, or the very voice of the Almighty expressing his displeasure with mortal kind. The locomotive, a massive construction of iron and steam weighing several tons, derailed instantaneously. Its momentum carried it to starboard, off the rails entirely, where it toppled upon its flank with its furnace yet burning, belching black smoke and crimson sparks into the white tempest. Behind it, the tender and the first 2 passenger carriages folded upon themselves like a carpenter's rule, their wooden frames splintering as matchwood. The third carriage, the carriage wherein Alexander Weiss sat absorbed in his reading concerning Greek deities and the nature of time, remained intact for perhaps half a second. Then the fourth carriage struck it from behind with the full weight and velocity of the train's remaining cars. The carriage simply exploded. There exists no other word that adequately conveys what transpired. The wooden walls disintegrated into splinters. The roof separated from its moorings and flew laterally into the storm. Metal fittings transformed into deadly projectiles. Glass became a cloud of murderous shards, and the passengers, mothers and fathers, men of business and children, were cast about like rag dolls in the hands of some malevolent giant child. But the horror had not yet reached its conclusion. The Leeds Express, traveling northbound upon the Down Line, had departed Huntingdon at 5:30 past 6 o'clock. Its driver, Thomas Peacock, was likewise following the signals that displayed clear by reason of the accumulated snow and ice. The signalman at Abbots Ripton, Thomas Marnell, had endeavored to set his signals to danger following the first collision, but in his shocked and disordered state of mind, he failed to dispatch immediately the 5-beat obstruction danger telegraph signal to the succeeding signal box. The message was transmitted mere seconds after the Leeds Express had already passed beyond that box, traveling at full velocity toward Abbots Ripton. At 7:40 past 6 o'clock, Thomas Peacock perceived something that no driver ever desires to witness: the wreckage of another train, directly in his path, scattered across both sets of metals. He observed white lights from the frozen signals at Abbots Ripton station. Then he heard 2 fog signals explode beneath his wheels, desperate warnings placed by the guards of the wrecked express. I at once shut off steam and instructed my mate to apply the tender brake. Peacock subsequently deposed. I was then proceeding at 40 or 50 miles per hour. In another instant, I encountered an engine upon the up-road giving sharp whistles and perceived a red lamp from it, which I took to signify that something was amiss. I reversed my engine and reapplied my steam, and no sooner had that been accomplished than the collision occurred. The Leeds Express plowed through the wreckage at nearly 40 miles per hour. The greater portion of the fatalities occurred in that second collision. Bodies were crushed betwixt carriages. Passengers who had survived the initial impact were cast upon the tracks where the Leeds Express passed over them. The wooden carriages of the Scotch Express, already compromised by the first collision, were pulverized into fragments no larger than kindling. Among those killed instantaneously were Heinrich and Rachel Weiss. Their son Alexander, seated between them but moments previous, was thrown clear of the carriage during the first impact. He sailed through the air. Witnesses who survived would later describe observing a small figure silhouetted against the snow for but an instant and came to rest in a snowbank approximately 30 feet from the principal wreckage. When the Leeds Express struck, Alexander Weiss was already interred beneath 2 feet of fresh snow, invisible to the world, his body broken in ways that ought to have signified certain death. Chapter 2. The First Memories, St. Bartholomew's Hospital, London, 28th of January, 1876. The medical case notes of Dr. Edmund Cartwright, preserved in the archives of St. Bartholomew's Hospital and only recently made available to researchers, contain the following entry dated January 28, 1876. Patient Alexander Weiss, male child, age 11 years. Admitted 22nd January following the railway catastrophe at Abbots Ripton, presenting symptoms: compound fracture of left humerus, severe contusions to the thorax, lacerations to the scalp. Most remarkably, documented cessation of cardiac and respiratory function for a period I personally verified at 14 minutes, followed by spontaneous resurrection. The boy's physical injuries heal with inexplicable rapidity. More disturbing are the alterations to his mental faculties. He speaks with the vocabulary and manner of a learned gentleman, though his parents, both deceased in the accident, were simple tradespeople. He demonstrates knowledge of events not yet transpired. This morning he informed Nurse Davies that her sister in Canterbury would deliver twin daughters on the 3rd of February. Nurse Davies' sister is indeed with child, though the family had no knowledge of twins, nor could they have anticipated the precise date of confinement. Most troubling of all, the boy's eyes. When he speaks of future events, his pupils move in a manner I have never observed in 30 years of medical practice. They appear to dilate and contract simultaneously, creating an optical effect that causes acute discomfort in the observer. I find myself unable to maintain eye contact with the child for more than a few moments. I have written to Dr. John Connolly at the Middlesex County Asylum, Hanwell. If any man in England possesses the expertise to evaluate this case, it is he. What Dr. Cartwright did not record in his official notes, but confided to his private journal, discovered locked in a strong box after his death 37 years hence, was the exact content of his first extended conversation with Alexander Weiss. It occurred on the evening of January 25th, 3 days after the boy's miraculous resurrection. The other patients in the ward had been settled for the night. Gas lamps burned low along the walls, casting long shadows across the rows of iron bedsteads. Cartwright sat beside Alexander's bed with his notebook open, determined to document the case with scientific precision. "Tell me what you remember of the accident," Cartwright began, his pen poised above the page. Alexander turned his head upon the pillow to regard the doctor. In the dim light, his eyes appeared almost black. "Which accident, Dr. Cartwright?" the boy asked quietly. "Do you mean the collision at Abbots Ripton on the 21st of January, 1876? Or do you mean the derailment at Tay Bridge on the 28th of December, 1879, when the center spans will collapse during a storm and send an entire train into the Firth of Tay, drowning all 75 souls aboard? Or perhaps you refer to the disaster at Armagh on the 12th of June, 1889, when a runaway carriage will collide with an oncoming train, killing 80 children on an excursion. The pen slipped from Cartwright's fingers. "Those events," he stammered, "those events have not occurred." "Not yet," Alexander agreed, "but they will. I remember them all, you see. Every disaster, every death, every moment of horror that awaits this world. I remember the Great War that will consume Europe from 1914 to 1918, though they will call it the Great War, until an even greater one follows it from 1939 to 1945. I remember the day in August 1945 when a single weapon will destroy an entire city in a flash of light hotter than the sun. I remember—" "Stop!" Cartwright's voice emerged as a hoarse whisper. "You cannot possibly know these things." "Cannot?" The boy tilted his head in that peculiar manner that seemed too old for his years. "But I do know them, Doctor. I know them because I have already lived through them. Do you comprehend? When I died in that snowbank at Abbots Ripton, when my heart ceased its beating and my breath departed my body, I did not go forward into death. I went forward into time itself." Cartwright retrieved his pen with trembling hands. That is quite impossible. Time moves in one direction only, from past to future. It is an immutable law of nature." "Is it?" Alexander's lips curved in that cold, ancient smile. "Tell me, Doctor, when you dream, does time move forward or backward? Do you not sometimes dream of events from your childhood as vividly as if they were occurring in the present moment? And when you wake, do you not sometimes confuse dream and reality, uncertain which memory is true and which is false?" "Dreams are not reality," Cartwright protested. "Are they not?" The boy's gaze intensified. "What if I told you that what you call reality is merely the dream from which you have not yet awakened? What if death is not an ending but an awakening, a moment when time flows backward instead of forward, when you experience your entire existence in reverse, from death to birth, until you arrive at the beginning once more?" That is mere philosophical speculation," Cartwright said, though his voice lacked conviction. "Then let me offer you proof," Alexander said. "Proof that I have already lived the life you are yet to experience." The boy closed his eyes, and when he spoke again, his voice took on a strange quality, distant yet intimate, as if he were reading from a book only he could see. "On the 14th of March, 1913, you will retire to your bed at 10:30 in the evening, as is your custom," Alexander recited. "You will kiss your wife good night. Her name is Margaret, though you call her Maggie, and she will remark that you look tired. You will assure her that you are quite well, merely fatigued from a long day at hospital. You will fall asleep within moments, and at approximately 3 o'clock in the morning, a blood vessel in your brain will rupture. You will not wake. Maggie will discover you at dawn, and she will hold your hand and weep. And the last thought that passes through your consciousness, if such a word can be applied to that final flickering of awareness, will be of this moment, this very conversation. You will remember the boy from Abbots Ripton who told you the manner and moment of your death, and in that final instant, you will understand that I spoke true." The ward fell absolutely silent, save for the hissing of the gas lamps. Cartwright's hand moved across the page, recording the boy's words despite his mind's violent rejection of their content. When he finally found his voice, it emerged as barely more than a whisper. "How can you possibly know such things?" "Because I was there," Alexander said simply. "I attended your funeral, Dr. Cartwright, the 18th of March, 1913, At St. Sepulchre's Church, your son Robert delivered the eulogy. He will speak of your dedication to medicine, your kindness to the poor, your love for your family. Maggie will wear black bombazine and a veil, and she will not weep during the service because she will have already exhausted her tears in the preceding 4 days. 47 people will attend. The weather will be unseasonably cold for March, with intermittent rain. The vicar will be Reverend Thomas Ashworth, and he will choose as his text John 11:25. I am the resurrection and the life. Cartwright's pen had stopped moving. His hand lay motionless upon the page, ink from the nib spreading in a dark blot. This is madness, he whispered, is it? Alexander opened his eyes and fixed the doctor with that impossible gaze. Or is it the only sane response to an insane universe? You wish to believe that I am deranged, that the trauma of the accident has disordered my faculties. That explanation would be comfortable, would it not? It would allow you to maintain your conviction that the world operates according to rational laws, that cause precedes effect, that time flows in one direction only. The boy sat up in his bed, and despite his youth and his injuries, there was something in his posture that commanded absolute attention. But I am not mad, Dr. Cartwright, Alexander said. I am merely the first person in recorded history to die and come back facing the wrong direction in time. And what I have seen, what I remember, what I know is waiting for this world. He paused, and for the first time since his resurrection, something like genuine fear crossed his features. Perhaps madness would be preferable, he finished quietly. St. Bartholomew's Hospital, 3rd February, 1876. Nurse Elizabeth Davies received a telegram at 2:30 in the afternoon. Her sister in Canterbury had been safely delivered of twin daughters that very morning. She went immediately to Dr. Cartwright's office. The boy, she said without preamble, her face pale beneath her starched white cap. The Weiss boy, he knew. How could he possibly have known? Cartwright removed his spectacles and pressed his fingers to his temples. I have no explanation, Miss Davies. There must be an explanation, sir, she insisted. He predicted the precise date, the exact circumstances. My sister's physician had given no indication of twins. It is impossible that the boy could have known through any natural means. I am aware, Cartwright said wearily. Then what is he? Davies demanded. What manner of creature speaks prophecies like some Old Testament prophet? The other nurses are frightened, sir. Yesterday he told Nurse Watts that her father would die of apoplexy on the 17th of March. He told Orderly Johnson that his eldest son would perish in a war that has not yet been declared, in a country most of us have never heard of, in a year that seems impossibly distant. The staff are refusing to attend to him. They say he is unnatural. Cartwright replaced his spectacles and met her gaze. Send a telegram to Hanwell, he said quietly. Inform Dr. Connolly that we have a patient requiring his immediate attention. And Miss Davies. Yes, sir? Do not repeat what the boy told you about your sister's twins, Cartwright said. Do not speak of his predictions to anyone outside this hospital. The newspapers would create a sensation, and that is precisely what we must avoid. Whatever Alexander Weiss has become, he requires scientific study, not public spectacle. But even as he spoke these words, Dr. Edmund Cartwright knew they were futile. One cannot keep such secrets indefinitely. Already the other patients had heard Alexander's prophecies. Already rumors were spreading through the wards like contagion. The boy who remembered the future would not remain anonymous for long. Hanwell Asylum, Middlesex, 15th February, 1876. Dr. John Connolly stood before the Committee of Visiting Justices of Middlesex County Council and presented his preliminary assessment. Gentlemen, I have examined the boy Alexander Weiss on 3 separate occasions over the past week, he began, referring to his notes. His physical condition continues to improve at a rate that defies medical explanation. The compound fracture that ought to have required 6 weeks to heal has mended in less than 3. His other injuries have resolved with similar rapidity. "And his mental state?" inquired Sir Geoffrey Hamilton, the chairman. Connolly hesitated. At age 71, having spent 40 years studying disorders of the mind, he had encountered every variety of insanity known to medical science. But Alexander Weiss did not fit any recognized category. "The boy exhibits no signs of mania, melancholia, or dementia," Connolly said carefully. "His faculties of reason and memory appear intact. Indeed, his memory is extraordinarily acute. He demonstrates no evidence of hallucination or delusion in the traditional sense." And yet, Hamilton prompted, "and yet he makes statements concerning future events with absolute conviction," Connolly continued. "Moreover, a disturbing number of his predictions have proven accurate. The case of Nurse Davies' sister is merely the most recent example. He has correctly forecast several minor incidents at St. Bartholomew's, including the precise time of a fire in the laundry, the arrival of 3 patients from a coaching accident before news of said accident had reached London, and the exact wording of a letter from the hospital's board of governors." "Coincidence, surely," suggested another justice. "I thought so at first," Connolly admitted, "but the accumulation of correct predictions begins to strain the limits of mere chance. And there is another factor, gentlemen, which I find deeply troubling." He paused, choosing his words with care. "The boy is aging," he said. "Aging?" Hamilton frowned. "All children age, Dr. Connolly." "Not at this rate," Connolly said. "When I first examined him on the 8th of February, he appeared precisely as one would expect an 11-year-old boy to appear. When I examined him again on the 12th, I observed subtle changes, a slight coarsening of his features, a deepening of his voice. By my 3rd examination yesterday, the alterations were unmistakable. The boy now exhibits physical characteristics more consistent with an adolescent of 15 or 16 years. In 1 week, gentlemen, he has aged approximately 4 years." The committee members exchanged uncomfortable glances. "That is impossible," Hamilton said flatly. "I would have said the same, sir," Connolly replied. "I would have dismissed it as observational error or trickery. But I have measurements, gentlemen. Height, weight, bone structure, dental development, all objectively verifiable data. The boy is aging at an accelerated rate, and if the progression continues at its current pace—" He did not complete the thought. He did not need to. "What is your recommendation, doctor?" Hamilton asked quietly. "I recommend that Alexander Weiss be transferred to Hanwell for intensive study and observation," Connolly said. "Whatever phenomenon we are witnessing, it requires careful documentation. The boy may represent a significant advancement in our understanding of the human mind and its relationship to time and memory. Or, Hamilton prompted. "Or he may represent something else entirely," Connolly finished, "something for which medical science has no adequate terminology." The committee voted to approve the transfer. Alexander Weiss would be conveyed to Hanwell Asylum on the 20th of February, 1876. What none of them knew, what they could not have known, was that on that very evening the boy had whispered to Dr. Cartwright his most terrifying prediction yet. "The 7th of August, Alexander had said, his voice hollow and distant. "Mark that date well, Doctor, the 7th of August, 1876. In Radstock, Somerset, a goods train will collide with the rear of a passenger train. 15 people will die, including 5 children. But that is not the important part." "What is the important part?" Cartwright had asked, though he dreaded the answer. Alexander's eyes had gone completely black. "The important part," the boy said, "is that I will be there, not to prevent it, not to warn anyone, but to remember it, because that is what I do now, Doctor. I remember disasters before they occur. I collect deaths like other boys collect butterflies, and each memory I add to my collection ages me a little more, brings me closer to the end that is also my beginning." He had smiled then, that terrible ancient smile. "I am running out of time, Dr. Cartwright," Alexander Weiss had whispered, "which is rather ironic when you consider that I have already lived through all the time there is to live." That night, Dr. Edmund Cartwright added a final note to his private journal. "God help us all. I believe the boy is telling the truth." Chapter 3. The Experiments of Dr. Kimura Hanwell Asylum, Middlesex. 3rd March, 1876. The experimental apparatus occupied the entirety of the East Wing treatment room, a maze of copper wire glass vessels filled with chemical solutions and galvanic batteries that hissed and sparked in the dim gaslight. Dr. John Connolly stood before this assemblage with a mixture of scientific enthusiasm and profound unease. "You understand," he addressed the assembled physicians and members of the Committee of Visiting Justices, "that what we are about to witness represents the absolute frontier of medical knowledge. The relationship betwixt the electrical properties of the human nervous system and the manifestations of mental disease has long been theorized but never adequately investigated. This boy, Alexander Weiss, may provide us with unprecedented insights into the very nature of consciousness itself." The boy in question sat in a wooden chair at the center of the apparatus, perfectly calm despite the electrodes attached to his temples, wrists, and chest. He had aged again. Where 2 weeks prior he had possessed the appearance of an adolescent of 15 years, he now exhibited the physical characteristics of a young man approaching his majority. His face had lost its childish roundness, his shoulders had broadened, and when he spoke, his voice carried the deeper timbre of adulthood. Yet his eyes remained unchanged, those impossible ancient eyes that seemed to contain depths no human gaze ought to possess. "Proceed whenever you are ready, Dr. Connolly," Alexander said quietly, "though I must warn you that your apparatus will prove ineffective. You cannot measure what I have become with instruments designed for ordinary men." Sir Geoffrey Hamilton leaned forward in his observation chair. "The boy is remarkably composed for someone about to undergo electromagnetic treatment. Most patients exhibit considerable anxiety at the sight of such machinery." "He exhibits no anxiety about anything," Connolly replied. "That, gentlemen, is perhaps the most disturbing aspect of his condition. He possesses the emotional affect of someone who has already experienced every possible circumstance and consequence. Nothing surprises him, nothing frightens him. He moves through the world with the weariness of a man 3 times his apparent age, which, given his accelerated aging, may not be far from the truth." Connolly turned to his assistant, a young physician named Dr. Thomas Harrington, who had recently completed his studies at Edinburgh. "Apply the electrical current, if you please. We shall commence with a low voltage and gradually increase the intensity, whilst observing the patient's physiological responses." Harrington moved to the battery apparatus and closed the circuit. Nothing happened. Or rather, nothing that the assembled observers expected to happen occurred. The needles on the galvanometers, which ought to have registered the flow of electrical current through Alexander's body, remained motionless. The chemical solutions in the glass vessels, which ought to have bubbled and changed color in response to the current, remained clear and still. "Increase the voltage," Connolly instructed, frowning. Harrington adjusted the controls. Still nothing. "Double it," Connolly said. The voltage was increased to a level that ought to have produced painful muscular contractions in any ordinary subject. Alexander sat motionless, regarding his observers with an expression of patient sympathy. "I did warn you," he said softly. Your electrical apparatus functions on the principle that current flows from one point to another, from positive to negative, from past to future. But I exist outside that flow now. Or rather, I flow in the opposite direction. Your instruments cannot measure me because I am moving backwards, whilst they attempt to measure forwards. That is impossible, Dr. Harrington objected. The laws of electricity are immutable. Are they? Alexander tilted his head in that peculiar manner that had become his characteristic gesture. Tell me, Dr. Harrington, what is the date of your death? Harrington paled. I have no idea, obviously. The 17th of November, 1891, Alexander said calmly. You will be 42 years of age. Typhoid fever, contracted whilst treating patients during an outbreak in the Whitechapel district. You will linger for 6 days before succumbing. Your wife Sarah will be at your bedside when you expire. Your final words will be, I should have been more careful. The room fell absolutely silent. How dare you? Harrington began, his voice trembling with outrage. I dare because it is true, Alexander interrupted. And because I remember attending your funeral, Dr. Harrington. I remember the eulogy delivered by your colleague, Dr. Frederick Bellows. I remember your widow's tears and the gray November rain that fell upon your casket as it was lowered into the earth at Highgate Cemetery. I remember all of it because I have already lived through it, just as I have already lived through this moment, this conversation, this failed experiment. Dr. Connolly raised his hand for silence. Disconnect the apparatus. It is clearly ineffective. As Harrington moved to comply, his hands shaking visibly, Connolly addressed Alexander directly. If electrical measurement proves fruitless, we must employ other methods, he said. I propose a series of physical examinations to document the progression of your accelerated aging. Additionally, I wish to conduct extensive interviews concerning your memories of future events. If we cannot understand the mechanism by which you perceive time differently, perhaps we can at least catalog the information you possess. You may conduct whatever examinations you wish, Alexander said, but I must ask, to what end? What will you do with the knowledge I provide? Will you warn the world of coming disasters? Will you attempt to prevent the deaths I remember? Or will you simply document my existence as a curiosity, a medical anomaly to be studied and then forgotten? We will do what we can, Connolly replied, though his voice lacked conviction. No, Alexander said flatly, you will do nothing because you cannot do anything. Time does not work that way, Dr. Connolly. You cannot change what I remember any more than you can unremember your own childhood. The future is as fixed and immutable as the past. It has already happened. I am merely unfortunate enough to remember it. Hanwell Asylum, 15th March, 1876. Dr. Connolly's private notebook, entry dated 15th March, physical examination of patient Weiss conducted this morning. Measurements as follows. Height, 5 feet 9 inches, an increase of 4 inches since his admission on 20th February. Weight, 11 stone 3 pounds, an increase of approximately 2 stone. Apparent age, 22-25 years. Actual age, 11 years, 7 months. The boy, though I can scarce continue to refer to him as such, now possesses the full physical development of a man in his early 20s. His voice has completed its change. His facial features have matured entirely. Gray hairs have appeared at his temples. Most disturbingly, I observed during today's examination several age spots upon his hands, the kind typically associated with men in their 5th or 6th decade of life. If the progression continues at its current rate, Alexander Weiss will exhibit the physical characteristics of a septuagenarian by the end of summer. He will die of old age before his 12th birthday. I have written to colleagues in Edinburgh, Vienna, and Paris, describing the case in careful detail whilst omitting the patient's identity. Thus far, no one has encountered a similar phenomenon. One colleague suggested that this might be a case of progeria, the rare condition wherein children age prematurely, but the acceleration in Weiss's case far exceeds anything documented in medical literature. Moreover, progeria does not grant its sufferers knowledge of future events. That particular aspect of his condition continues to defy explanation. This morning he informed me that on the 2nd of May there will be a fire at the Theatre Royal in Edinburgh. He provided specific details. The fire will commence at approximately 11:30 p.m. during a performance of The Corsican Brothers. The death toll will be negligible, 3 persons, but the theatre itself will be entirely destroyed. I have no means of verifying this prediction before the appointed date, but given his previous accuracy regarding Nurse Davies' sister and the Radstock collision, which did indeed occur precisely as he foretold on the 7th of August, I find myself inclined to credit his prophecy. God forgive me, but I am beginning to believe him, all of it, every impossible word. Hanwell Asylum, 28th March, 1876. The visitor arrived without warning on a gray afternoon when spring rain lashed against the asylum windows. He gave his name as Father William Ashworth, vicar of St. Sepulchre's Church in Holborn. He requested an audience with Alexander Weiss on a matter of spiritual urgency. Dr. Connolly received him in his office with considerable curiosity. I was not aware that the patient had requested spiritual counsel, Connolly said. He did not request it, doctor, Father Ashworth replied. He was a man of perhaps 50 years, with iron gray hair and the careworn countenance of one who has attended to many deathbeds. But I believe he requires it nonetheless. You see, I have been having dreams. Dreams, Father. The same dream every night for the past fortnight, Ashworth said. I dream of a funeral, my own church, my own voice delivering the eulogy, though I cannot hear the words. And always, standing at the back of the church, I see a boy, or rather a young man who looks like a boy aged too quickly. He watches the proceedings with eyes that seem to contain, I know not how to describe it, doctor, sorrow beyond measure, knowledge beyond bearing. Connolly felt ice settle in his stomach. And what made you connect this dream to my patient? Yesterday morning I visited St. Bartholomew's Hospital to administer last rites to a parishioner, Ashworth explained. Whilst there, I encountered Dr. Edmund Cartwright, who spoke to me of a most unusual case he had recently transferred to your care. When he described the patient, particularly the eyes, I knew immediately that this was the young man from my dreams. Dr. Cartwright ought not to have discussed confidential medical matters, Connolly said stiffly. He did not provide the patient's name or specific details, Ashworth assured him, merely enough to pique my curiosity and confirm my suspicions. Doctor, if this young man is who I believe him to be, if he truly possesses knowledge of events yet to transpire, then his soul is in grave peril. I fail to see how prophetic abilities constitute spiritual danger, Connolly said. Father Ashworth leaned forward, his expression grave. Because, doctor, to know the future is to bear the weight of God's omniscience, without possessing God's strength to endure it. It is to see every tragedy, every death, every moment of human suffering before it occurs, and to be powerless to prevent it. That is not prophecy, doctor. That is damnation. The meeting between Father Ashworth and Alexander Weiss occurred in the asylum's small chapel, a modest room with plain wooden pews and a simple altar. Dr. Connolly observed from a distance, positioned near the door. Alexander sat in the front pew, his posture upright, his hands folded calmly in his lap. When Father Ashworth entered, the young man's expression shifted slightly, Not quite a smile, but something close to recognition. "Father Ashworth," Alexander said, "I have been expecting you." "Of course you have," Ashworth replied, taking a seat beside him. "You know why I have come." "You have come because you dreamed of my future," Alexander said. "Or rather, of your future, which exists in my past. You dreamed of Dr. Cartwright's funeral on the 18th of March, 1913. You delivered a most moving eulogy, Father. Your text was taken from John 11:25. I am the resurrection and the life." Father Ashworth closed his eyes briefly. "Then it is all true. Everything Dr. Cartwright suggested." "Everything and more," Alexander confirmed. "I remember your death as well, Father, though you will outlive Cartwright by 11 years. You will die peacefully in your sleep at the age of 74 on the 9th of October, 1924. Your last conscious thought will be a prayer of thanksgiving for a life well lived." "And does knowing this comfort you?" Ashworth asked quietly. "Does it bring you peace to carry such knowledge?" For the first time since his resurrection at Abbots Ripton, Alexander's composure faltered. His hands, folded so calmly in his lap, began to tremble. "It brings me nothing but agony," he whispered. "You speak of damnation, Father? You understand correctly. I am damned to watch the world destroy itself over and over again. I remember wars that will kill millions. I remember plagues that will ravage continents. I remember the precise moment when humanity discovers how to split the atom and turns that discovery into a weapon capable of annihilating entire cities in seconds." His voice broke. "And I can do nothing to stop any of it," Alexander continued, "because it has already happened, because I have already lived through it all, because time does not flow forward for me anymore. It flows backward, and I am drowning in memories of futures that feel more real than the present moment." Father Ashworth placed a hand on the young man's shoulder. "Then why?" he asked gently. "Why were you given this curse? What purpose does it serve?" Alexander raised his eyes, those impossible ancient eyes, and met the priest's gaze. "I have pondered that question every waking moment since Abbots Ripton," he said, "and I have arrived at only one conclusion. I am not a prophet, Father. I am a witness. Someone must remember what is to come. Someone must bear the burden of that knowledge. And for reasons I cannot fathom, I have been chosen for that terrible duty." "But to what end?" Ashworth pressed. "If you cannot change events, if the future is as fixed as you claim, then what purpose does witnessing serve?" "Perhaps," Alexander said slowly, "there is no purpose. Perhaps I am simply the universe's way of remembering itself. Or perhaps—" He paused, and something flickered across his features, something that might have been hope or might have been fear. "Perhaps I am meant to carry this knowledge until time itself begins again," he finished. "Until the end becomes the beginning and I am born once more, and all of this, all of these memories, all of this suffering will finally make sense." Father Ashworth sat in silence for a long moment. Then he asked the question that would haunt Dr. Connolly for the remainder of his life. "And when does it end, Alexander? When do you reach the beginning?" Alexander smiled, that terrible ancient smile. "September 23rd, 1876, he said. 5 months from now, on that day I will die in this asylum, in a room very much like the one where I currently reside. My body will be that of an 80-year-old man. My mind will contain memories spanning more than a century. And in my final moment of consciousness, I will whisper words that only you will hear, Father Ashworth." "What words?" Ashworth asked, though his voice trembled. "You will know when the time comes," Alexander replied. "But I will tell you this much. They will not bring you comfort. They will bring you the same burden I carry, the knowledge that time is not what we believe it to be, and that death is not an ending but a turning, and that all of us are trapped in an eternal cycle from which there is no escape. He stood, suddenly weary beyond measure, aged beyond his years. "Thank you for coming, Father," he said. "Your visit has reminded me that I am still, in some small way, human, that I can still be comforted, even if I cannot be saved." As Father William Ashworth departed the chapel that afternoon, he passed Dr. John Connolly near the door. The two men exchanged a glance, one of shared horror, shared helplessness, shared knowledge that they had encountered something that defied all rational explanation. Neither spoke. What words could possibly suffice? Dr. Connolly's private notebook, 28th March, 1876. "I have failed. We have all failed. The boy continues to age, continues to remember, continues to bear witness to futures none of us will live to see, and we can do nothing but watch and document his decline. Tomorrow I shall commence a detailed recording of his prophecies. If he truly remembers the next century of human history, then that knowledge must be preserved, even if we lack the power to act upon it. God help us all. We are standing at the threshold of mysteries the human mind was never meant to comprehend." And Alexander Weiss, poor, doomed Alexander Weiss, has already crossed that threshold and cannot find his way back. Chapter 4. The Price of Knowledge. Hanwell Asylum, 12th June 1876. The photograph was taken on a gray morning when fog lay thick upon the asylum grounds, muffling all sound save for the distant cries of patients in the locked wards. The photographer, Mr. Charles Bennett of Regent Street, had been commissioned by Dr. Connolly to create a medical record of Alexander Weiss's unprecedented condition. What Bennett captured on his wet collodion plate that morning would, in time, become one of the most disturbing images in the history of medical photography. The subject sits in a high-backed chair, his hands resting on his knees, his posture rigidly upright. But this is not the 11-year-old boy who survived Abbott's Ripton 4.5 months prior. The figure in the photograph possesses the physical appearance of a man approaching his 6th decade, perhaps 55 or 60 years of age. His hair, which had been dark brown in January, has turned completely silver gray. Deep lines bracket his mouth and crease his forehead. Age spots mottle the backs of his hands. But it is the eyes that make the photograph truly unsettling. Even through the primitive medium of 1876 photography, even rendered in shades of sepia and gray, those eyes convey something profoundly wrong. They are too knowing, too ancient, too filled with a sorrow that seems to extend beyond the capacity of human experience. Mr. Bennett later confided to his wife that he had felt compelled to leave the darkroom immediately after developing the plate, and that for 3 nights afterward he dreamed of those eyes watching him from impossible distances. The photograph bore a caption in Dr. Connolly's precise handwriting: "Patient A.W., age 11 years 10 months, apparent physical age 60 years, taken 12th June 1876. Subject expired 23rd September 1876. The date of death had been written in advance, because Alexander had told them when he would die. Dr. Connolly's journal, dated 15th June 1876. I have completed the most extensive documentation of prophecies ever undertaken in medical history. Over the past 3 months, Alexander Weiss has provided detailed descriptions of events spanning from 1876 to 2095, more than 2 centuries of human experience condensed into the failing mind of a boy man whose body ages a year for every week that passes. The prophecies are organized into several volumes, which I have secured in the asylum's strongbox, with instructions that they not be opened until the year 1976, 1 century hence. I have done this partly to protect the boy from those who would exploit him, and partly because I am not convinced that humanity should possess such knowledge. Some of his predictions are so horrific that I pray fervently they prove false, though his accuracy thus far suggests otherwise. Among the less disturbing prophecies, the invention of a wireless telegraph that will allow communication across vast distances without physical connection, the development of horseless carriages powered by petroleum engines, the conquest of diseases such as smallpox and cholera through vaccination programs, the ability to transmit moving pictures and sound through the air into devices present in every home, and among the more disturbing, a great war beginning in 1914, triggered by an assassination in Sarajevo that will claim 20 million lives. A second, even more devastating war from 1939 to 1945, ending with weapons that harness the power of the atom itself, the systematic murder of 6 million Jewish people by a German state between 1941 and 1945, a Cold War between America and Russia that will bring the world repeatedly to the brink of annihilation, environmental catastrophes resulting from industrial progress, changing climate, rising seas, mass extinctions. How does one respond to such knowledge? How does one continue with the mundane business of daily life whilst carrying the weight of humanity's future suffering? Alexander asked me that very question this morning. "Now you understand," he said quietly. "Now you carry a fraction of what I carry every waking moment. Tell me, Dr. Connolly, does the knowledge comfort you? Does it give you peace?" I could not answer him, because the truth is that this knowledge has robbed me of peace entirely. I find myself looking at the young orderlies and thinking, will your grandson die in the trenches of France? I observe children playing in the asylum courtyard and wonder, will your great-grandchildren witness the destruction of entire cities in atomic fire? The boy, I continue to call him that, though he now resembles my grandfather more than my son, has cursed me with a glimpse of his burden, and it is indeed a curse, not a blessing. Prophecy, I now understand, is not a gift. It is a form of torture. Hanwell Asylum, 3rd July 1876. The incident occurred during afternoon visiting hours. A woman presented herself at the asylum gates, giving her name as Mrs. Elizabeth Hartley of Bloomsbury. She requested an audience with Alexander Weiss on a matter of urgent personal importance. When questioned by the attendant, she explained that her husband had recently died in a factory accident, leaving her with 3 young children and no means of support. She had heard rumors, whispers in markets and pubs throughout London of a prophet residing at Hanwell who could foretell the future. "I need to know," she pleaded with Dr. Connolly when he interviewed her in his office, "whether my children will survive, whether we shall avoid the workhouse, whether there is any hope for us at all." Connolly regarded her with sympathy and profound unease. The rumors had begun spreading 6 weeks prior despite his best efforts to maintain confidentiality. Patients who had been discharged spoke of the prophet. Staff members confided in family members. Somehow, inevitably, the story had leaked beyond the asylum walls. "Mrs. Hartley," Connolly said gently, "I cannot permit you to see the patient. His condition is grave and he requires rest. Moreover, I must counsel you that knowing the future, if such knowledge were even possible, would not bring you comfort." "But sir," she protested, tears streaming down her face, "if he could tell me just one thing, if he could assure me that my children will live, that we shall not starve, that knowledge would be everything to me." Before Connolly could respond, a voice spoke from the doorway behind her. "Your eldest daughter will contract tuberculosis in 1879 and die before her 10th birthday. Your middle child will survive to adulthood and marry a blacksmith named Thomas Cole in 1893. Your youngest son will emigrate to America in 1895 and prosper in the state of Massachusetts. You yourself will die on the 14th of February, 1881, of pneumonia, in the Bloomsbury workhouse, alone save for an attendant who will not even know your name." Mrs. Hartley turned to see Alexander standing in the hallway, leaning heavily upon a walking stick. He looked impossibly old now, his spine curved, his face deeply lined, his movements those of a man in his 70s. "Is that the comfort you sought?" Alexander asked softly. "Is that the knowledge you desired?" The woman stared at him in horror. Then she turned and fled, her sobs echoing down the corridor as she ran. Connolly rose from his desk, anger flashing across his features. "That was unconscionably cruel," he said. "Was it?" Alexander hobbled into the office and lowered himself carefully into a chair. "I gave her exactly what she requested, knowledge of the future. That she found it unbearable is not my fault. You all wish to know what is to come. You believe that foreknowledge will grant you power, control, security. But prophecy offers none of those things. It offers only the certainty of suffering, rendered more acute by the impossibility of prevention." He met Connolly's gaze with those terrible ancient eyes. "I did not ask for this burden, Doctor," Alexander said quietly, "but since it has been thrust upon me, I will not pretend that it is anything other than what it is, a curse, and I will not allow others to romanticize prophecy, to treat it as some mystical gift. It is horror, pure and simple. And if I can spare even one person from seeking such knowledge, then perhaps my damnation serves some purpose after all." Connolly sank back into his chair, suddenly exhausted. "You grow more bitter with each passing day," he observed. "Of course I do," Alexander replied. "Would you not grow bitter if you had watched empires rise and fall, if you had witnessed millions die in wars that could have been prevented, if you had seen humanity discover wonders beyond imagination, only to use them for destruction? I am dying, Dr. Connolly, dying whilst living backward through time, and with each day that passes, I remember more horrors, more tragedies, more moments of human cruelty and stupidity that stretch forward for centuries." He paused, wheezing slightly. His breath had begun to labor in recent days. "The worst part," he continued, "is not the dying. The worst part is the knowledge that this has all happened before and will all happen again. That time is not linear but circular, that we are trapped in an eternal recurrence from which there is no escape, that everything I remember has not yet occurred but is simultaneously inevitable." "That is simply paradox," Connolly protested. "Philosophical speculation, not fact." "Is it?" Alexander smiled, that cold, ancient smile. "Then explain me, Doctor. Explain how I know things that will not occur for decades or centuries. Explain how my body ages whilst my mind moves backward through time. The only rational explanation is that I have already lived through all of this, that I am now experiencing my life in reverse, that death and birth are simply 2 points on an eternal circle." He rose slowly from the chair, supporting himself on his walking stick. "I have less than 3 months remaining," he said. 3 months until I reach the moment of my birth into death, or my death into birth. I can no longer distinguish between the two. When that moment comes, Dr. Connolly, I shall finally be free of this burden, or I shall find myself beginning the cycle anew. I confess I do not know which prospect frightens me more. Hanwell Asylum, 7th August, 1876. The telegram arrived at 4:30 in the afternoon. "Railway collision, Radstock, stop 15 dead, stop, details follow, stop." Dr. Connolly sat at his desk, holding the flimsy paper in trembling hands. Alexander had predicted this disaster 6 months ago, down to the precise date and location. A goods train colliding with the rear of a passenger train in Radstock, Somerset. 15 dead, including 5 children, exactly as foretold. He found Alexander in the day room, seated in a wheeled chair that had become necessary as his body continued its relentless decline. The old man, for that is what he had become, despite his 11 years and 8 months of actual life, was staring out the window at the gray summer sky. "You knew," Connolly said. "I know everything," Alexander replied without turning. "I knew the Radstock collision would occur today. I know that on the 31st of October, a cyclone will strike Bengal and kill more than 200,000 people. I know that on the 5th of December, the Brooklyn Theater in New York will burn, killing nearly 300. I know the precise moment and manner of every disaster that will befall humanity for the next 2 centuries. But you cannot prevent them," Connolly said quietly. "No," Alexander agreed, "because they have already happened. I am merely remembering them as they occur again in this particular iteration of time's great circle. To attempt to prevent them would be like attempting to prevent one's own birth. It is not merely futile, it is impossible." Connolly moved to stand beside the wheeled chair, looking down at the figure who had once been a child. Alexander's hair was completely white now. His hands shook with palsy. His breathing came in short, labored gasps. The doctors estimated his apparent physical age at somewhere between 75 and 80 years. "How much do you remember?" Connolly asked. "All of it," Alexander whispered. "Every moment from now until the end of the 21st century. I remember the Great War that begins in 1914. The trenches, the gas, the millions of young men dying in mud. I remember the Second War and its conclusion in nuclear fire. I remember the Cold War, the space race, the fall of empires and the rise of new ones. I remember technologies that would seem like magic to you. Machines that think, weapons that kill from halfway around the world, a global network that connects every mind on Earth simultaneously." He turned his head slowly to look at Connolly, and there were tears in those ancient eyes. "And I remember the cost of it all, Doctor," Alexander said. "The environmental devastation, the wars fought over resources, the widening gulf between rich and poor, the surveillance states and authoritarian regimes, the refugees fleeing rising seas and failing harvests. I remember humanity's greatest triumphs and its most shameful failures, all woven together in a tapestry of progress and destruction that stretches forward for more than 200 years. "Then tell me," Connolly urged, "tell me how to prevent it. Tell me how to change the future you remember." Alexander smiled sadly. "You still do not understand. The future cannot be changed because it is not truly the future. It is the past seen from a different angle. Everything that will happen has already happened. We are simply experiencing it in sequence, moment by moment, believing we possess free will when in truth we are merely actors reading lines from a script already written." "That is fatalism," Connolly protested. "That is a denial of human agency." "Is it?" Alexander asked. "Or is it simply acceptance of reality? Tell me, Doctor, can you remember something that did not happen? Can you unlive a moment you have already experienced? Of course not. The past is fixed, immutable. And what I am telling you is that the future is equally fixed, equally immutable. It simply hasn't been experienced yet by those traveling forward through time." He coughed, a deep, rattling cough that shook his entire frame. "But I am traveling backward," he continued when he had recovered his breath. "I am experiencing the future as memory and the present as a diminishing moment of clarity. Soon, very soon, I will reach the beginning, which is also the end. And then—" "And then?" Connolly prompted. "And then I suspect the cycle begins anew," Alexander finished quietly. "I will be born again into death or die again into birth, and I will experience it all once more. The same disasters, the same triumphs, the same inevitable march of time from past to future to past again, forever. That would be hell, Connolly whispered. Yes, Alexander agreed, it would. Dr. Connolly's journal, 7th August, 1876. The Radstock collision has shaken me profoundly. Not because it occurred, I had, by this point, come to accept the veracity of Alexander's predictions, but because of what it represents. If he is correct about Radstock, then he is correct about everything else. The wars, the genocides, the atomic weapons, the environmental catastrophes. All of it is not merely possible, but inevitable, fixed in time like photographs in an album, waiting to be turned to and experienced in sequence. This knowledge is crushing. How does one continue living with the certainty that humanity's future contains such horrors? How does one raise children, pursue happiness, maintain hope, when one knows with absolute certainty that within 2 generations the world will descend into a war that kills tens of millions? Alexander is dying. His body gives out more each day. In 6 weeks, perhaps 7 at most, he will reach the end of his strange journey backward through time, and I confess, I am relieved, not because I wish him dead, but because his death will remove this terrible burden of knowledge from the world. Once he is gone, we can return to our comfortable ignorance. We can believe again in free will, in the possibility of change, in a future that is not predetermined. We can live without the crushing weight of prophetic certainty. But late at night, when I cannot sleep, I think about his final prediction, that time is circular, that this has all happened before and will all happen again. And I wonder, what if he is right? What if, somewhere in some future century, another child will die and come back remembering everything? What if this cycle truly is eternal, and knowledge and ignorance are simply phases in an endless oscillation? If that is true, then perhaps the real hell is not knowing the future. Perhaps the real hell is knowing that knowledge itself is futile, that we are all trapped in a cosmic play, performing the same scenes over and over for all eternity, unable to change a single word of the script. God help us all. Chapter 5. The Last Memory, Hanwell Asylum, 23rd September, 1876. The clocks were stopped at precisely 3:47 in the afternoon. This was the Victorian custom. When death approached, timepieces throughout the household were halted at the moment of expiration, as if to mark the instant when the deceased departed from temporal existence. Dr. John Connolly found something grimly appropriate in this tradition being applied to Alexander Weiss, the boy who had spent his final months existing outside the normal flow of time. The room had been prepared according to the rituals of the era. The curtains were drawn to prevent the soul from departing prematurely. The single mirror in the chamber had been covered with black cloth, lest the soul become trapped in its reflection. A bowl of water and a white cloth sat upon the bedside table, ready for the washing of the body. Alexander lay in the narrow iron bed, propped up on pillows, his breathing shallow and labored. He looked impossibly ancient now, his skin translucent and papery, his frame wasted to mere bones, his white hair sparse upon his spotted scalp. The doctors estimated his apparent physical age at somewhere between 80 and 85 years. He was 11 years and 11 months old. In the room with him were Dr. Connolly, Dr. Cartwright, who had traveled from St. Bartholomew's specifically for this occasion, Father William Ashworth, and a nurse named Mary Sullivan, who had tended Alexander during his final weeks. The atmosphere was heavy with anticipation and dread. "He has been lucid all morning," Nurse Sullivan whispered to Connolly. "Speaking of things that have not yet occurred. He seems agitated, as if something troubles him greatly." "Everything troubles him," Connolly replied quietly. "He carries the weight of 2 centuries in his failing mind." As if hearing them, Alexander's eyes opened. Those eyes, even now at the very end, they retained that impossible quality of ancient knowledge. They turned slowly toward Father Ashworth. "Father," Alexander whispered, his voice barely audible. "You came." "Of course I came," Ashworth said, moving to sit beside the bed. "I promised you I would be here at the end." "The end," Alexander repeated, and something that might have been a smile crossed his withered features. "Or the beginning. I can no longer tell the difference. Time has become circular for me. I am approaching the moment of my birth, which is also the moment of my death, the Ouroboros consuming its own tail." He paused, wheezing. Dr. Cartwright stepped forward with a damp cloth to wipe the old man's brow. "Tell me," Connolly asked gently, "what do you remember now? At this moment? At the very end?" Alexander's gaze drifted toward the covered window, as if he could see through the heavy curtains to something beyond. "Everything," he whispered, "and nothing. The memories are collapsing in on themselves, past and future, merging into a single eternal present. I remember being born, truly born, as an infant in 1865. I remember my childhood before Abbott's Ripton, before the accident that broke time for me. I remember my parents alive and whole, my father teaching me to read, my mother singing lullabies. Tears leaked from the corners of his ancient eyes. And simultaneously I remember everything that came after, no, everything that came before, because I am living backward now. I remember the 21st century, the 20th, all the way back to this moment, this room, this deathbed. It all exists at once in my mind, a vast tapestry of time with no beginning and no end, just an eternal cycle of birth and death and rebirth." "Is it true then," Father Ashworth asked softly, "what you told us months ago, that time is circular, that we are all trapped in an eternal recurrence?" Alexander turned his head to look at the priest. "I do not know," he admitted. "I thought I knew. I thought I had seen the pattern, understood the structure of time itself. But now at the end, or the beginning, I am uncertain." He coughed, a terrible rattling sound that shook his entire emaciated frame. "Perhaps," he continued when he could breathe again, "time is not circular but spiral. Perhaps each cycle is slightly different, an endless variation on eternal themes. Or perhaps time is neither circular nor spiral but something else entirely, something our minds lack the capacity to comprehend." "Then what was the purpose of your suffering?" Dr. Cartwright asked, unable to keep the anguish from his voice. "If you cannot even tell us with certainty what time is, what was the point of you experiencing this curse?" Alexander smiled again, that ancient, weary smile they had all come to know. "The purpose, my dear doctor, is the same as the purpose of all human suffering," he said, "to bear witness, to remember, to prove that consciousness, that terrible, beautiful burden we call self-awareness, can endure even when time itself flows backward." He paused, his breathing becoming more labored. "I have borne witness to humanity's future," he continued. "I have seen our greatest triumphs and our most shameful failures. I have watched empires rise and fall, technologies advance and destroy, wisdom grow and be forgotten. And now, at the moment of my death, I pass that burden to you." "To us?" Connolly asked. "You have recorded my prophecies," Alexander said, "locked them away in your strongbox to be opened in 1976, 100 years from now. When that time comes, when someone reads what I have remembered, they will carry a fragment of my burden. They will know what is to come, and perhaps, just perhaps, that knowledge will make a difference." "But you said the future cannot be changed," Father Ashworth protested. "You said it was as fixed as the past." "I said many things," Alexander replied wearily. "Some of them may even have been true, But the truth, Father, is that I do not know. How can anyone know for certain whether the future can be changed? To know that one would have to experience the same moment twice and observe different outcomes. And if time is truly circular, if we are doomed to repeat the same cycle eternally, then perhaps such knowledge is impossible. The afternoon light filtering through the curtains began to dim. Outside, somewhere in the asylum grounds, a bell tolled the quarter hour. "I am dying," Alexander said simply. "I can feel it. My heart is slowing. My breath grows short. In moments, perhaps minutes, I will reach the end of this strange journey backward through time." He lifted one trembling hand toward Father Ashworth. The priest grasped it gently. "I promised you," Alexander whispered, "that in my final moment I would tell you something that would burden you with the same knowledge I carry. Are you prepared to receive it?" Father Ashworth hesitated, then nodded. "I am prepared." "Then listen carefully," Alexander said, his voice fading to barely more than a breath. "Because what I am about to tell you is the most important thing I have learned in my backward journey through time." The room fell absolutely silent. Even the distant sounds of the asylum, the cries of patients, the footsteps of attendants, seemed to fade away. The four observers leaned closer, straining to hear. Alexander's lips moved, forming words that only Father Ashworth could hear. The priest's face went white. His hand, holding Alexander's, began to tremble violently. Tears sprang to his eyes. "No," he whispered. "Dear God, no. That cannot be." But Alexander was smiling now, a genuine smile, the first any of them had seen since his resurrection at Abbots Ripton. "It is," the dying man breathed. "It always was. It always will be." His eyes closed. His chest rose once, twice, then fell still. At 3:47 p.m. on September 23, 1876, Alexander Weiss ceased breathing. Dr. Cartwright immediately checked for a pulse, found none, and placed his ear to the chest to listen for a heartbeat. After a long moment, he straightened and looked at Dr. Connolly. "He is gone," Cartwright said quietly. The clocks remained stopped. The curtains remained drawn. The mirror remained covered. But Father William Ashworth sat frozen, his hand still grasping the dead man's, tears streaming down his face, his expression one of absolute horror. Later that evening, Dr. Connolly's private study. "What did he tell you?" Connolly demanded, pacing before the fire. "What could he possibly have said that affected you so profoundly?" Father Ashworth sat slumped in an armchair, a glass of brandy untouched in his hand. He looked as though he had aged 10 years in the past few hours. "I cannot tell you," he said hoarsely. "I gave him my word that I would not reveal it." "But surely," Connolly began. "No," Ashworth interrupted firmly. "Some knowledge is too terrible to share. He was right about that. Prophecy is not a gift, but a curse. And what he told me, what he revealed in his final breath." He trailed off, staring into the fire. "What?" Connolly pressed. "What did he reveal?" Father Ashworth raised his eyes to meet the doctor's gaze. "He told me when and how I will die," he said slowly. "But that was not the terrible part. The terrible part was what comes after." "After death?" Connolly asked, confused. "Surely as a priest you already have beliefs about the afterlife." "This was not about the afterlife as theology conceives it," Ashworth said. "This was about the nature of existence itself, about what it means to be trapped in time, about—" He stopped, shaking his head. "I cannot," he finished. "I will not. Let some knowledge die with me. Let humanity continue in its comfortable ignorance. Alexander was right. We are not meant to know these things." The British Museum, London, 1st October 1976. Exactly 100 years later, Dr. Elizabeth Morrison, a historian specializing in Victorian medical practices, sat in the museum's archive room with a leather-bound volume before her. It had been sealed with wax and locked in a strongbox for precisely 1 century, as per the instructions left by the late Dr. John Connolly. The seal had been broken that morning. The volume, titled The Prophecies of A.W., documented 1876, lay open on the table. Dr. Morrison had spent the past 6 hours reading. The prophecies were astonishingly detailed and, where they could be verified against historical record, disturbingly accurate. The world wars, the atomic bomb, the Cold War, technological developments, all described with precision by someone who supposedly lived and died in 1876. But it was the final page that made her hands shake as she read. To whoever reads this in the year 1976, know that time is not what you believe it to be. Know that consciousness can flow backward as well as forward. Know that death and birth are merely 2 points on an eternal circle from which there is no escape. I write this on the 30th of September, 1876, 1 week after Alexander Weiss's death. In his final moments, he revealed to Father Ashworth a truth so terrible that the good priest refused to speak it aloud. But Ashworth confided one detail to me before his own death in 1924. Alexander told him that this was not the first time he had lived this life backward, nor would it be the last. Time, Alexander claimed, is a closed loop. We are all of us, every human who has ever lived or will ever live, trapped in an eternal recurrence, living the same lives over and over again for all eternity. We believe we have free will, but we are merely actors performing a script that has no author, no beginning, and no end. And the most terrible part, the detail that broke Father Ashworth's faith and haunted him until his death. Alexander claimed that in future iterations of the cycle, others would experience what he experienced, that his backward journey through time was not unique, but rather a glimpse of the true nature of existence that occasionally breaks through into consciousness. I will be born again, Alexander told Ashworth, and I will live this life again, and I will die at Abbots Ripton again, and I will remember the future again, and I will tell you these same words again, and this cycle will repeat for all eternity, and somewhere in some future iteration, you will be the one who remembers. You will be the one who dies and comes back wrong. You will be the one who bears witness to time's eternal circle. I do not know if this is true. I cannot know, but I record it here for posterity, so that when the year 1976 arrives and someone reads these words, they will understand the full weight of what Alexander Weiss experienced. May God have mercy on us all. Dr. John Connolly, 30th of September, 1876. Dr. Morrison sat back in her chair, her heart pounding. She looked at the date on the document, September 30th, 1876, exactly 100 years ago to the day that she was reading it. And in that moment, as she sat in the silence of the British Museum archive room, Elizabeth Morrison felt the strangest sensation, as if she had read these words before, as if she had sat in this same chair, in this same room, reading this same document in some previous iteration of a cycle that had no beginning and no end. She shook her head, dismissing the thought. It was merely the power of suggestion, the psychological effect of reading such disturbing material. But that night, Dr. Elizabeth Morrison dreamed of a train crash in the snow. She dreamed of a boy with ancient eyes who died and came back wrong. She dreamed of living backward through time, remembering futures that had not yet occurred. And when she woke, gasping at precisely 3:47 a.m., she could not shake the feeling that she had dreamed these same dreams before. Somewhere in the infinite cycle of eternal recurrence, a boy named Alexander Weiss was being born, or dying, or both at once. Time, after all, is not what we believe it to be. Epilogue from the private papers of Father William Ashworth, discovered after his death in 1924. I have kept Alexander's secret for 48 years, but now, as I approach my own end, I feel compelled to record the truth, if only so that someone, somewhere, might understand. What Alexander told me in his final breath was this: I remember you, Father. I remember this exact moment. I remember every word we are speaking, because I have lived through this moment 1,000 times before, and I will live through it 1,000 times again. And in a future cycle, perhaps the next one, perhaps 1,000 cycles from now, you will be the one lying in this bed, dying of old age at 11 years old, remembering futures that terrify you beyond measure. You will tell me the same words I am telling you now, and I will feel the same horror you feel, because this is not the first time we have had this conversation, and it will not be the last. God forgive me, but I believe him. I have believed him every day for 48 years, and sometimes, late at night, I remember things that have not yet happened. I remember wars I have not lived through. I remember technologies that do not yet exist. I remember dying and being born and dying again in an endless spiral of time that has no escape. If you are reading this, whoever you are, whenever you are, know this: time is not linear, death is not final, and somewhere in the infinite cycle of eternal recurrence, Alexander Weiss is dying again, being born again, remembering again. May God have mercy on all of us trapped in time's great wheel. Father William Ashworth, October 8, 1924, the end.